so we can go back for notes. All right, so again, welcome. And my name is Melanie Garner with Kellen Foundation. I am the CRI team lead, as well as working on the NCTSM program. And we are happy to be celebrating and bringing recognition to National Minority Mental Health Month. We've got some fantastic speakers lined up, and also want to hear from everybody on any updates that you have. So we'll do that a little later in the meeting. But first, I want to start with just a welcome and recap. So again, if you're just joining us, go ahead and put your name and your agency in the chat so we'll know who's here today. And just recapping our June meeting, Leila, if you would jump ahead. We focused on Resilient and Thriving Communities Week, and we welcomed Kelly Purcell, and I believe that she's on here today as well. So thank you, Kelly, for being in our June meeting. And she spoke a little on PACES and the Healthy Blue Initiative, which is across the state of North Carolina. It is an initiative funded by Healthy Blue involving resilient initiatives that are already in place or new initiatives to the PACES connection, and also working to improve the health and well-being of foster children and families, as well as their caregivers. So I added this slide today. This was in Kelly's presentation in June. And this is just a how to join PACES connection. So if you have any questions about that or interest in that, you can put it in the chat, and we will certainly add that to our meeting notes so that you can get involved. Lots of great resources, and we'll hear more on PACES connection in a little bit, but lots of resources there for you. And also thank you to Lou Misha with Guilford County Partnership for Children, a local nonprofit for children, ensuring that all Guilford County children ages birth to 5 years are emotionally, intellectually, and physically ready for success in school. So thank you both for joining our June meeting, and we appreciate all of the information that you shared with us. So real quick, I know we've had some jump on. Thank you all for being on our Resilient Guilford meeting for July. And if you would share in the chat your name and your agency so that we can hear, know more about who's here, and also be sure to share all of our meeting notes after today's meeting. Thank you, Kelly, for sharing that in the chat. So Kelly just shared the link to how to join PACES Connection. So again, lots and lots and lots of good resources there. So I am going to pass it to Leland, and we're going to next go into a resiliency pause to get our headspace and our minds here today.
Good afternoon, everybody. Happy Wednesday. I hope you're all doing well. Thank you for joining us, and thank you, Mel, for kicking us off. So something that we like to do at the Kellen Foundation, and those of you that have joined us before for RGN are familiar, we like to take just a resiliency pause to help us regulate our nervous systems and to bring us into this space. I don't know about y'all, but this morning was a little hectic and running. And so just gonna take a minute to ground us in this space. So we're gonna do a grounding exercise today. And my script today comes from the Community Resiliency Model, CREM. Some of you may be familiar, but I'm just going to invite you to find a comfortable position. You can leave your camera on or you can turn it off, whatever feels good for you today. And we're just going to take a minute to ground together. So find a comfortable position and just notice your back making contact with the chair. If you're sitting, bring attention to your seat, making contact with your chair, your sofa, your couch in your office. Now just notice your legs and then your feet. And bring awareness to your feet, making contact with the ground. And notice the sensations that are more pleasant to you or neutral within your body. And just do a body scan and if you become aware of any uncomfortable sensations, bring your attention to places that feel neutral or more comfortable. Just take a moment And continue to focus on those pleasant or neutral sensations. And as we get ready to end, just bring your attention to all those sensations that are pleasant or neutral. And then when you're ready, you can reorient to your space, to the screen, to us in this meeting. If you'd like to, I invite you in the chat to just put your experience and what you felt. But otherwise, welcome back, and we will continue on with the meeting.
All right, thank you, Leland, for leading us through that. It's always nice to just take a pause and reset as we're working hard throughout the day and working to make a difference. So thank you for guiding us through that process. I have the distinct honor and pleasure of introducing our first speaker. Her name is Ingrid Cochran. Many of you may be familiar with her. She is the CEO of PACES Connection. And she is also, just to share a little bit about her, she is also a child sexual abuse survivor that knows firsthand how impactful trauma and toxic stress can be for children and families. She has dedicated her professional life to investigating and educating the public about the link between trauma and early adversity, ACEs, and possible negative outcomes throughout the lifespan. She's graduated from Tennessee State University with a bachelor's in psychology and Vanderbilt University's Peabody College with a MED in child studies, specializing in minority and impoverished children. Her research areas are specifically around African-American parenting styles, adverse childhood experiences, historical trauma and intergenerational trauma, brain development, developmental psychology, and epigenetics. She has a vast range of experience across systems. She's an active volunteer and a community change agent. She recently joined PACES Connection as the CEO, and I know I can say that I'm excited about her role there and just excited to learn from her today about some very important topics. You know, obviously July is National Minority Mental Health Month, but this is an important topic every month, not just in July. And so we're excited to learn from her. And so I'm going to pass the baton to Ingrid to share information that that all of us should be more aware of and things that we can use in the practices that we provide every day. So Ingrid.
Thank you so much for that introduction, and thank you for the invitation, Dr. Graves. I hope everyone can hear me. I am going to share my screen, and I am the queen of too many slides. So what I'll do is, if I find myself kind of flying through them, I will make sure that I send them along so that you have a copy. So today's topic is very important, and I always want to give a disclaimer whenever I'm talking about race or anything that's considered controversial, that my intent is not to offend, and that we are really here to share experience, to be educated, and to really have a deeper understanding of the past. So I always like to give that disclaimer, and also just to let everybody know that I do not mince words. So I say what I mean. So if I mean, you know, white supremacy, I say white supremacy. And so I want to make sure that everybody is just kind of aware that, again, the purpose is not to offend. So as Dr. Graves said, I'm the CEO of PACES Connection. We always frame all of our discussions around PACES science, which is really focused on the public health approach, the impact of stress on the brain and body, epigenetics, which is really how stress and trauma can change our DNA and our makeup and the way our DNA is expressed. An example of that is what we'll talk about today, which is historical trauma. And then resilience. And so I recently did an event with Dr. Bruce Perry, and I have debated about how much we talk about resilience within the context of this specific topic around historical trauma. I always push back on thinking through resilience as an individual issue when we're dealing with toxic systems like racism and institutional racism. But I will say that definitely we have the capacity to heal ourselves in our bodies, in our brains, and we have the capacity to build healthy organizations and systems and communities that can then allow for individuals to be able to be resilient as their genetic capacity allows. And so PACE's connection really is about supporting communities. And what we want to do is solve our society's most intractable problems. And unfortunately, one of our most intractable problems is racism, at least in this country and maybe worldwide. But we want to, or at least in this conversation, I want to kind of change the narrative that we have been taught in our lives being immersed in this American experience. I wanted to make it very clear that as we look at social determinants of health, as we can see here, issues around education, health and healthcare, the built environment in our neighborhoods, economic stability, that these are issues that are specifically driven by both historical trauma and institutional racism combined. And that's the reason why we see all of the different disparities that we see today when we look at our statistics that tell us that certain groups are struggling when it comes to these different factors and other groups are not. We, in the past, in this country, have been kind of inundated with white supremacy, so much so that we believe that these disparities, these differences are cultural in nature or are a reflection of genetic race, which we still kind of cling to the belief that we are actually different because our skin color and our hair texture and our eye color is different. And research has shown that that is not true, that there is no such thing as genetic race. Race is a social construct. And also that it is more about the environments that we have created that drive these disparities. So it is not skin color, but actually the environments that are created within our society based on the color of our skin that drive these disparities that we see when it comes to these social determinants of health. And so the question is, how did we get here? Right now, we have people who are very upset about critical race theory being taught in schools, which is not true. Critical race theory is not being taught in, at least in K through 12. Critical race theory is a legal theory. However, it is a theory that can be looked at across different sectors. So originally, critical race theory was brought about by Derek Bell, who was Harvard's first law professor. And he believed, again, this is a theory, that the legal system specifically was built on white supremacy and was inherently a racist system. And that the legal system then perpetuated disparity in outcomes based on race. And so I happen to agree with him for the legal system, but I think that this could also be something that we could look at when we look at our healthcare system, when we look at education. But these are the tenets that he originally came up with for critical race theory. His belief was that white supremacy is deeply embedded within our society and that it is permanent. He also believed that racism is institutional, not individual. He believed that America's power structure was built to marginalize people of color, in that, you know, we tend to think that it somehow happens that certain groups are experiencing disparity. Mr. Bell would say that the structures were built for that purpose, that only white male landowners would thrive when we are at the root of our institutions, when they were first birthed. And then lastly, that race is a social construct and used as a tool to stratify power. And so looking at this theory, I definitely want to invite people to use the chat to say, yes, they agree, no, they agree to some, but not others. Feel free to kind of reflect on these four tenets and use the chat to share your reflections. One thing that I will say, I'm also a psychology professor, and often when I talk with my students, the things that come up in our class, which is the class is at an HBCU, so it's mostly African American students. You know, the belief that racism is not individual. And we do have a lot of discussion around that. And so this is one aspect that I don't agree with. I think racism is both individual and institutional. But thank you for including your responses in the chat. When we think about critical race theory and whether or not we believe it to be true or not, again, it is a theory. The Rise Center, however, has done a great job of really allowing us to have more thought about the initial ACEs pyramid. So the initial pyramid, which I'm sure that everyone is pretty familiar with, that was first conceptualized by Drs. Anna and Folletti, it really outlined that adversity in childhood, this is the first pyramid that you see, the base is 0 to 18, well, actually conception to 18, being a critical period where if you experience adversity, then it led to disrupted neurodevelopment, which then led to social and emotional and cognitive impairment, and could lead to the adoption of health risk behaviors, disability, disease, and social problems, and ultimately early death. And that first study was extremely compelling because it found that as we experience more adversity in those first 18 years, then life expectancy was deeply impacted. And also that it was definitely correlated with issues of chronic disease like diabetes, high blood pressure, other heart diseases, and any really chronic stress-related disease. And this was a reflection of several things. Obviously, the changes to the brain, and then ultimately the changes to our body, or what we call the epigenetic changes, which would be kind of the driver behind the increase in chronic disease, mental illness, and cognitive impairment. And so one thing that Drs. Anna and Folletti were able to do was to outline that not only can these changes happen in our lifetime, but then they can be passed along to future generations through those epigenetic changes, through reproduction, and also through intergenerational transmission, which would be more environmental, like parenting practices in neighborhoods. And here you have the Rise Center out of California, where they extended this pyramid to encapsulate historical trauma as well. So we have at the base, historical trauma and generational embodiment, which is really saying that before you were born, the experiences of your ancestors would make it more or less likely for you to experience trauma in your lifetime. This means that groups that have historical trauma are more likely to experience complex trauma or 3 to 4 ACEs. And so when we look at this, obviously we can go to, again, chronic disease, which is, at least in our healthcare system, we've conceptualized it as if you are Black, then you are more likely to experience chronic disease because you have a predisposition. You're predisposed to diabetes, high blood pressure, X, Y, and Z. And this would, for someone hearing this diagnosis, or if we look at the research and we're ingesting what we're reading, then we might think, oh, okay, these groups are physically different and they're more likely to experience these chronic illnesses. When the truth of the matter is that ACEs science has shown us that trauma is a driver for these chronic diseases. It's a driver for these epigenetic changes, which means that because of my ancestors' stress and trauma and the epigenetic changes that they experience, that I am more likely to have these chronic diseases and thus have impact to life expectancy. And then on the other end, we have practices that go along with being traumatized. So when we think about historical trauma, if we look at African Americans specifically, we're talking about 403 years of the Black experience in America that has been rife with slavery, assault, rape, family separation, economic exploitation, wage theft, land theft. And this has been happening up until present day. Present day, this looks like police brutality, over policing in neighborhoods, and the school to prison pipeline, poor healthcare access. And so when we look at this 400-year landscape, we see that the social conditions and the local context matter and have created disparity. And on one end, that disparity looks like the poor outcomes we talked about. On the other end, on the psychological aspect, as you can see towards the top of this second extended pyramid, you will see, criminalization and stigmatization. So because we have been in a society that has viewed us as criminal based on skin color and has viewed our distress in a way that is more stigmatized than other groups, then you'll also see that because I'm Black, I'm less likely not just to have access to mental health care, but to use it. Because I'm Black, I'm less likely not just to have access to physical health care, but to use it even when I have it. And this is because I have internalized what it means to be Black in America. And I've also adopted the survival practices of my ancestors, which then is essentially coping, but not all coping serves us well. So that looks like food that, because during slavery wasn't refrigerated, was leftover, whatever I could get, whatever scraps I could get, had to be heavily seasoned to hide the fact that it was spoiled, had to be fried well to kill off any bacteria. It's not exactly fresh. Those cooking practices that are cultural adaptations for survival don't serve me well today in my diet. Being fearful of institutions in the past would have served me well. It would serve me well not to believe doctors or teachers in the past. Today does not exactly serve me well. And so we have to look at how the combination of both the changes to DNA and those epigenetic changes, as well as the adaptations that we've made to survive in an environmental sense, have converged into this space where we have poor outcomes. And the narrative change that needs to go along with that. Again, these disparities are not happening because Black people are Black, but because white people are white. And the environments that have been created for a group of people over the years has created huge chasms in care, in being just seen as a human being, and also definitely an opportunity and economic stability. So the RISE Center has done a great job of capturing that, and I will get that visual to you after this as well. So if we look at what it looks like for this to progress over time, what we're talking about is a collective trauma, in this case, slavery, slavery and also the Reconstruction and Jim Crow, because we tend to think that after slavery ended, things just went to kind of even keel, and that's not the case. So we have the collective trauma of experience, slavery and discrimination and hostile, overt discrimination and violence. This collective trauma then became intergenerational. As people go through a collective trauma, they go through a process of meaning making. And this meaning making process, they internalize their environment. They teach their children to survive in this environment. Those practices are then passed through generations. And then we have what appears to be culture to others, but is really an adaptation to a hostile environment. This leaves what we would call difficult psychological legacy, so much so that as African-American children are born into this environment, one of their first core memories is when they experience otherness, the first time they experience discrimination or racial bullying, or the first time they experience an understanding that they're different. This becomes a core memory, and it happens as early as 3 to 6 years of age. This is when they get to inherit this burden of being othered and understanding that they're a part of a different group that is somehow less than others. This phenomenon of intergenerational trauma was first discovered in 1966. Early research was done on survivors of the Holocaust children, so individuals who had not experienced the Holocaust themselves, but were children, first generation from Holocaust survivors. So what do we gain from understanding this background? First, we understand that historical trauma is not culture, that it is a survival technique that has been passed along through generations that impacts all aspects of culture: food, art, music, parenting. And when we look at it like this, then we begin to understand that we have to go through a process of healing that is intentional. This allows for us to be able to name the thing. It's not that Black people are different and special. They're people just like other people, but their environments, the environments that have been created around them, has caused them much mental distress and has really impacted the way they parent their children, because they are parenting their children in a way to be very clear that this is what we have to do to survive in this space as people with this color of skin. And this is good for survival, but maybe not good for enrichment and thriving. And we want to be very clear that being trauma informed is just the beginning of addressing this. We have to be not just trauma informed, but we need to be PACEs informed. We need to understand that positive childhood experiences can act as a buffer or protective factor. We need to be healing centered so that we can move towards having a just society. So much of our efforts now are around being trauma aware and trauma informed, but there's so much more there as we begin to really have an impact on systems and make changes that are good for the collective, not just good for one group. And so I'll make sure to share this so that you'll have what this means. This was developed by our race and equity group. And so I feel like I'm taking way too much time, but I want to talk about what the solution is. And the solution really is to think of positive childhood experiences as an equity issue. How are we providing experiences, especially for Black children, that will help them to have buffers against whatever experiences they have that are toxic and that really lie in discrimination, poverty, and racism. And so equity, when you're doing it right, is painful. No one likes it. It feels like you're taking away from other groups. If you find that your equity efforts are easy, then they're not true equity. We really need to think through what it means for those who have been traditionally underserved to get what they need. And then lastly, I want to, again, invite those of you who are not members to become members. We have probably the largest resource of trauma-informed information online, and we definitely believe that healing happens within communities. So if you are interested in starting a movement, and in addition to the one that you have now or consulting, please reach out to us. Thank you so much for your time.
All right. Thank you so much, Ingrid, for that very powerful presentation on such an important topic. We're going to take some Q&A in just a few moments. Towards the end, I'm going to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Tyra Turner Whitaker, who will give us an additional layer of information, and then we'll do some Q&A after that. So thank you so much again, Ingrid. Your information is powerful and motivating, and while of course it's hard to hear, it also, I see glimmers of hope on how we can change and how we can continue to grow and heal as a country to get to that healing centered space. So I am pleased to introduce to you now Dr. Tyra Turner Whitaker. She is a professor in the Department of Counselor Education and Family Studies at Liberty University and has over 23 years of experience as a counselor educator and grant writer. She has experience preparing counselors, counselor educators, advanced researchers, and clinical supervisors to work more effectively with diverse populations, and has secured over $8 million in grant funding specifically focused on addressing the needs of racial and ethnic minorities with disabilities and addictive behaviors. She has served on numerous professional boards, including the Arkansas Board of Examiners in Counseling, the Commission on Rehabilitation Counseling Certification, the National Council on Rehabilitation Education, and the Council for Accreditation of Counseling and Related Educational Programs. She is a gem, and I am so honored to introduce you to Dr. Tyra Turner Whitaker.
Hello, everyone. I hope you're able to hear me. And if you're able to see the slides, please give me a thumbs up. Awesome, awesome. Well, again, thank you so much, Dr. Graves, for inviting me today, as well as the Resilient Guilford Network. I am still marinating on a lot of the nuggets that Ingrid shared just now. It definitely hits home, especially as I am raising 2 children of color. So it definitely hits home for me. But again, I appreciate the opportunity to share on today. I wanted to begin by sharing a few statistics as we look at disparities in mental health. The US population becomes more diverse each year. And by 2044, it is projected that more than half of all Americans will belong to an ethnic group other than non-Hispanic white. Secondly, people from racial or ethnic minority groups are less likely to receive mental health care. And we heard about some of those disparities in Ingrid's presentation. Additionally, racial or ethnic minority youth with behavioral health issues are more readily referred to the juvenile justice system than to specialty primary care compared with white youth. Additionally, lack of cultural understanding by healthcare providers may contribute to underdiagnosis and or misdiagnosis of mental illness in people from racially or ethnically diverse groups. And I have 2 additional statistics that I think would be interesting for you. More than 100 studies have noted that the impact of race-based stress is more severe than obesity and smoking. And additionally, 1 in every 12 African-American men and 1 in every 36 Latino men are incarcerated, compared to 1 in every 106 white men. And I invite you to really sit with those statistics, and even using the chat, just share, how do those statistics make you feel? What bubbles up for you? So let's take a look at different barriers that impact access to treatment by Black, Indigenous, and people of color. The first is cultural mistrust. Cultural mistrust is an attitudinal response to historical and personal oppression in which people of color do not trust white people in institutional, societal, and or other contexts, especially personal contexts, just as a result of that historical oppression that you just learned about. Clients oftentimes assume that counselors represent those oppressive structures. So it takes time to develop rapport and to kind of work through the feelings of mistrust. Additionally, there's a stigma as it relates to mental illness or mental health in most communities of color. There is a powerful quote that Victor Armstrong, who is a member of the National Council for Behavioral Health Board of Directors, stated about mental health care and its stigma in Black communities more specifically. And he shared, and I quote, "For many in the African American community, our story is one of perseverance and resilience. After all, we survived slavery. Surely we can survive sadness or anxiety. In this mindset, anything less would be considered a spiritual or moral weakness." There's also a lack of diversity among mental health care providers. and also a lack of culturally competent mental health care providers. And again, when we're looking at that lack of representation, even within our agencies, we have a lack of individuals who are actually present to challenge some of the stereotypes and deeply held beliefs that we have. Additionally, we're looking at a lack of insurance or underinsurance among many BIPOC individuals, as well as language barriers and structural barriers, such as access to services, lack of transportation, access to technology. And I think we saw a lot of that during COVID, in which many individuals had no computers, or even if they had computers or cell phones, the bandwidth was not there in order to provide adequate services. So let's take a peek at a few cultural considerations. And Ingrid shared quite a bit on this already in terms of the intergenerational trauma and the role that intergenerational trauma plays on mental health. Additional cultural considerations is to understand the role of race-based traumatic stress and racial battle fatigue on mental health. I typically share with individuals, when you have people showing up for counseling or even showing up in venues such as this one, you never know the layers of stress and the layers of racial trauma that they're bringing to the table. There's even racial stress and trauma in just simply navigating white spaces. And I don't know if you know what that means, or if I need to elaborate on that anymore, but just being present in white spaces can oftentimes cause stress for those individuals from BIPOC communities. Living with the daily stress of being followed by the police, being fearful that the children will be murdered on a daily basis, just simply surviving is definitely a source of major stress for many individuals in BIPOC communities. And again, it's very important to understand the impact of COVID on BIPOC communities, especially when you're looking at healthcare and mental health care specifically. And finally, it's important to honor culturally related experiences in counseling or even in your daily interactions with people of color. Be careful not to oversimplify and or dismiss their experiences. I think that is very important, just to simply be in that space with them. Treat the space as a sacred space, and to honor their experiences goes a long way. So let's take a peek at a few action steps. And what I like to share as well is that a lot of times when we attend trainings or workshops, we tend to think that it's a magic pill where you kind of attend the training and it's like, hey, I checked it off, my list, and it's a one and done, I'm free. In fact, I conducted a training last year for the Illinois Department of Health and Human Services, and it was a diversity training. And there was an assessment that I distributed prior to the training. And one of the participants emailed me and asked, well, I took the assessment, I see my score. Once I complete your training, will I take this assessment again? And will I be culturally competent at the end? And I had to gently tell him, no, you will not be culturally competent at the end of this. This is a lifetime commitment for you. So it's very important to give yourself to the work of knowing that this is a lifelong commitment. So there's no magic pill, no one and done. And I'm also using the multicultural and social justice framework to share some of the action steps with you on today. The first is counselor self-awareness. I know some of you may not be counselors. Oh. Can you hear me? Okay, good deal. I know some of you may not be counselors. You may be advocates or whatever sector and role that you have. It's important to know who you are and know your racial and cultural identity. There are lots of ways you can do that. Reading is one. There are a lot of databases and platforms that allow you to just increase your knowledge about yourself, what your biases are, what your isms are. So it's very important as your first action step to just take a radical inventory of what you believe, why you believe those things, and just take a look at those different circles of your cultural self and do the internal work. Believe it or not, a lot of our clients or colleagues that we work with, they know when you've not done the cultural work, you've not done the inner work. So I encourage you to start there. Secondly, take a look at the cultural worldview of those with whom you work, your clients or consumers. Find out as much information as you can about their cultural background, being aware that not all people in that particular or of that particular culture feel, think, or believe the same. Thirdly, understand the impact of the two, of your worldview and your client's worldview, and being mindful of those subtle nuances of how that can be impacted by the differences in your isms, because everyone brings isms, if you will, to the table. Additionally, when looking at increasing your knowledge database, I took a look at the PACES network website. There's a wealth of resources there that you can benefit from in increasing your understanding of your client's worldview, your worldview, and the impact. Additionally, I wanted to share that I encourage you to engage in courageous conversations within your workplace, with your colleagues. Just have those conversations. It takes risk. Step out and find out what are the cultural experiences of the individuals who you're working with, the cultural experiences of those with whom you're serving, and just really find out more information and become an advocate, which leads me to my last step here. It's very important to engage in advocacy. And I know that each of you are probably connected to multiple groups that advocate on behalf of individuals from communities of color. Connect with your local cultural organizations that promote mental health awareness in BIPOC communities. I know locally, your sororities and fraternities, each of them have a mental health arm that you can work with. Additionally, Jack and Jill of America, especially for African Americans, has a mental health division as well, and KPASA Media Network. Work with your local churches to offer mental health trainings and to destigmatize mental health conditions and treatment, because especially, I can say in the African American community, there's a tendency to say, let's just pray that away, or we're going to lay hands on you and it's going to disappear. You're not going to deal with depression ever again. So it's very important to connect with those local churches to offer trainings, screenings, et cetera, to demystify mental health within those communities. Additionally, Mental Health America of Central Carolinas has emotional toolboxes for communities of color that are very helpful. Project Let's resources on race and mental health is very helpful as well. The Boris Lawrence Henson Foundation offers culturally competent trainings, and El Futuro provides Spanish-speaking immigrants with culturally responsive mental health services here in the Carolinas as well. I am going to provide you with a list of all of these resources that I think you will find helpful. In addition to the implicit association test, which I invite everyone to take, and the cultural competence self-assessment checklist. And I think that concludes my presentation. I know we're short on time here, so thank you.
Dr. Whitaker, thank you so much for sharing this powerful information and the tips and tools for ways in which we can start making action on these things immediately. I've already not written down the implicit association test I took years ago, but it's been years since I've done it. And so I want to, one action step that I want to do is to retake that and just kind of re-examine those pieces. So we're going to do Q&A now. So Melanie and Leland are going to facilitate the Q&A. So if you have questions, feel free to add them to the chat box, or put your raise hand up, and I'll pass the baton to Melanie and Leland.
Thank you, Kelly. And thank you so much, Dr. Whitaker and Ingrid, for your powerful presentations and your information. And so, yes, we want to open it up now for Q&A. If you have any questions, please feel free to put those in the chat, and Leland and I will monitor that and certainly get those answered for you. I want to say I did see a question earlier about PACES and the cost. And I will say that it is free, membership is free. And again, I encourage everyone to check that out. So much information on there. And I believe that Kelly Purcell may have put that link in the chat again as well, and Kelly just now. So please check that out. So any questions for Dr. Whitaker or Ingrid today?
I haven't seen any questions roll in, but I do see a lot of just affirmation and agreement, and appreciation for sharing the information, and for bringing awareness to it and bringing it to this space. So thank you all for that.
And I know sometimes when we get off of these meetings, you may think of some questions. So please, you may reach out to myself or anyone, Leland or Kelly at Kellen, and we will certainly get those questions answered for you. And we'll be sharing in the notes as well, the information that was shared, as well as the resources with everyone.
All right, so as people are going through, as we're finishing up, if there are questions that you have, throw them in the chat box. But we wanted to provide an open mic kind of opportunity for any partners that are on the call that might have trainings or workshops or a new service, things like that, that people would want to share for the good of the group, if there are opportunities that, that everyone could benefit from.
I did see a question, and I believe Leland, you may have answered it. See if I can go back up here. Will everything be shared? Yes, I will be following up with meeting minutes and sharing everything after our meeting today. It will come out by the end of the week.
And Kelly Purcell, not to put you on the spot, or Ingrid, I saw that an announcement just came out about some free trainings online through through PACES. Did you want to mention those?
Sure, Ingrid, would you like me to, or?
Oh yeah, sure, because there's so many different ones. I don't know
so
which one.
Yes, I put in that I'm humbled, very, very humbled to share the creating resilient communities, the CRC webinar series, where there's a lot of incredible webinars, free webinars to you all. I put the link in the chat to register for that. And then today is actually a launch for the book study, What Happened to You by Dr. Bruce Perry and Oprah Winfrey. It's an incredible opportunity to learn how to lead a book study for that book. So those are the two that I placed in there today. And Ingrid, please expand in any way that you'd like.
Yeah, thank you so much. The Creating Resilient Communities is a new offering. It's free to the public. And this is for people who, are just interested in learning more about ACEs as a social justice issue and how to create and maintain movements. But it's also for people who just have absolutely no understanding of ACEs, like someone that doesn't know about it at all. So feel free to share it with those who may, be very new to this kind of field of study. But the purpose of it is to help people to connect the PACES movement to whatever their causes are. So people may be interested in addressing community violence in their communities, or food deserts, anything. Really, this program helps people to connect how PACES science connects with their cause, because typically, you know, if I wanted to just talk to people about brain science, their eyes may glaze over. But if we talk about how it connects in the real world, then there's more of a understanding, and then there's more people who are ready to kind of take up the charge of having a movement and bringing their people in. Yes, I agree with you. Brain science is cool, and but it's not for everybody. But and then of course the book study is something that we'll be doing, and we're offering different books quarterly. And our first book is What Happened to You by Dr. Bruce Perry and Oprah. And so we're doing a book study project for that, and it launches today as well. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for all of the information. Yes, PACES is wonderful. So many resources. Please check it out. And I didn't see anything in the chat as far as updates with our trauma provider network. If you have updates or things you'd like to share, you have my email. You can send those to me, and I will include those in our notes as well. Any other announcements or things for the good of the group before we end today?
Just one other thing, Mel, on the next slide that I think you were going to. The American Psychiatric Association has launched an initiative called the More Equity in Mental Health Initiative. And this is a relatively new, not relatively, it's a new initiative. There's been, this is the first year that they've implemented it, but it's specifically focused on raising awareness about mental health and mental health equity. And so there are 5 partners that are working on this across the country. And one of them is Kellen Foundation, which I'm excited to be a part of. But I wanted to share this flyer just to share that throughout the month of July, there are some ongoing opportunities to participate in different webinars, roundtable conversations, community outreach events, et cetera. That might be of interest, particularly if you're wanting to engage more in diversity and health equity work. And we'll add this to the email that follows up from this particular presentation or this particular workshop today, so that you have access to these if you're interested in participating in them. So just wanted to share that as a potential opportunity for additional content on this topic.
Thank you, Kelly. And again, thank you to Dr. Whitaker. Thank you to Ingrid and Kelly for your information as well. We appreciate everyone for joining us today and being on this meeting and sharing your thoughts and feedback and just the powerful presentations today. We truly thank you, and we hope that you all enjoy the rest of your week. Up next, our next Resilient Guilford Network meeting will be August 3rd. So back on track on our first Wednesday from 12 to 1. So we hope to see all of you there, and a registration link and invite will come with that, with our notes as well. So thank you everyone for being here. Again, enjoy the rest of your day and your week, and we'll see you soon.